All right, turn this off. Got music going on everywhere.
Good morning.
How you doing, Bruce? How's it going over in your world in LA?
I'm well. I was just, when I was listening to the opening theme song, I just wanted to give a shout out to my friend Mike, who wrote that song. We recorded that in 1997 or 98.
Oh, wow.
And that's my good friend Michael Gam, great guitar player, who was my musical mentor. And then my older brother playing bass when he was still playing bass on that too.
Got dogs going on in the background.
Those were the old days, man.
Yeah, so I think it's a jamming tune. So
he called it Ninth Wave.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ninth Wave. All right. Is there a reason why you called it a ninth wave, or is that a surfing thing? That I don't
know. I'll have to call him up and ask him. I forgot. He probably had a reason at the time, but it's so many years down the line now. I wouldn't remember. I mean, I just had contact with him. We have occasionally messaged back and forth via email and stuff like that. Cause pandemic stuff, there's no real social hanging and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's true.
Year and 3 quarters or whatever. But, no, he'll send me some of his latest music and stuff that he's working on and kind of keep tabs on what I'm doing and stuff like that. He got involved in raising dogs too. He raises those, what is it? What are the bull terriers? Is that what they are? The target dog?
Yeah. I was gonna say, was the bull terrier also what was it? Spuds McKenzie? Was he a bull terrier?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. If I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yeah, so, but I think you're right.
People don't be offended. We don't know what we're talking about.
I gave up my dog showing credentials a long time ago.
Yeah. Exactly.
I have 2 Cocker Spaniels, and you have a little guy too, not so little.
Not a little guy, man. He's almost 11 months. He's about approaching 80 pounds.
40. I have 2 dogs that don't weigh a quarter of that together. I don't think. They'd be appetizers.
He's a jolly fellow. He is just, got to keep him on the short leash, so to speak,
Sure.
Literally and figuratively. I mean, figuratively and what do you say? Philosophically.
Wow. Being philosophical with a dog is
I'm on a walk this morning, and it was which we do every morning and every night. And yeah, man, it's always a trip, man. Sometimes he's great, and sometimes he's just like everywhere. So,
well, they're like kids, I imagine, except not. I also like kids.
My wife says that all the time. She goes 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, it. In some ways, they're easier. In some ways, they're actually just massively difficult. Yeah. So today I guess we're talking about rough drags and diddles. That's our topic today, huh?
Yeah, that's a law firm that I used to use for no.
Yeah, that'd be a great law firm. Here over here, Ruffs, Drags, and Diddles. Class action lawsuits.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so Ruffs, drags, and diddles. Well, first I want to make a clear distinction between the ruff and the drag. I've heard people call a 3-stroke ruff what I would refer to as a drag with a double stroke in before the dominant note. And so just going back to the Buddy Rich book with Henry Adler, they make a clear distinction. The ruffs are always single notes, and the drags are a double in front of the dominant note, and they're grace notes. So, you know, I've thrown out before regarding the 3-stroke ruff. Old school presentations would have had this up, tap, down, up, tap, down, up, tap, down as a slower setup. But as I always say in my teaching, I would not teach flams like and have a huge gap. The grace note is set up to grace the dominant note. So in order to facilitate a better pull towards the dominant note for ruffs, well, let's say for the 3-stroke ruff to start with, and then we can go to the 4 and 5. But you want to get that to draw right in. So what is that? That's really a push to pull. My starting point for that would be setting up what I call cascading and just falling to the pad. That's not exactly the mechanics that I would properly install when I play some 3-stroke ruff items, but the idea behind that is to feel the letting go of your weight of the stick with the pull of your forearm. So in other words, the weight of the stick leads your forearm back to the surface so you can actually let go, which of course, as I always say, is counterintuitive for drummers. And the push to pull is to bring in a very tight squeeze to the 2 notes that grace the dominant note. So if I was setting it up slower, my left hand, which is the, let's say the second note, the right, left, right, would be sitting a little bit higher to cascade to the pad. That allows my hand to get the push to the pull, because as I'm pushing, this guy finally comes into place and then I pull. And that pull will produce the accentuated note. So, and again, if I go back to the old school presentation of going up, tap, down, if I was playing that in front of, let's just do it in front of 16th notes, that's very laborious to go to get that kind of emotion. It's more efficient to get a little push to pull. So that's just a 3-stroke ruff in front of 16th notes. You can do it with the paradiddle. That's the presentation in the Henry Adler Buddy Rich book, which is quite challenging to go. And it goes through double paradiddles and triple paradiddles and sequences that are triplet based. I think they might be in 6/8. I don't remember. I don't have the book in front of me. But so for the 4-stroke ruff, you'd have the same mechanics, except now that left hand or right hand, depending upon the lead hand, will provide also a push to pull. So if I did a 4-stroke ruff with my right hand lead, again, push, push, tap, tap, or push, push, close, close, however you want to frame it. There's a few directives I might use. But again, I'll put it in front of a paradiddle. And I've done videos on my YouTube channel regarding, I think I have a 3-stroke ruff one. I didn't go deep into the sequence that I use. And the 4-stroke ruff paradiddle, I think I did something like that, where I said one of the hardest rudiments, which it is. It's not easy. And so here's a 4-stroke ruff paradiddle. Let's see, I'm not so warmed up, but let's see how we fare here. Not easy. So, you know, in general, a lot of people might say, well, what do I need to do all these rudiments for? I'm not going to play like that on the drum kit. You're fine-tuning the inside of your hand to have a better touch and a better nimbleness to what you can do with the stick. I would use a 4-stroke ruff. I may do the left-hand lead, but I would use it in maybe a shuffle setting or a few different settings. For example, if I was playing a shuffle, and I might go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Might use that. And the quality of the rip, again, can add maybe a higher level nuance that you're after. I always say too, with those kinds of push and pulls inside the hand, the end of the day is, are you able to facilitate with a good clarity and a good touch with what you're looking to speak out in your musical setting? In my regular daily life, I practice yoga, I meditate, but I don't sit down in the middle of the street and just start meditating, but I prepare. So when I do go out in the middle of the street, I don't yell and scream at people. So in your daily practice of rudimental exploits, you could find a fine tuning of the inside of your hand to really push forward the element of refining that push and pull. A new book, of course, I'm sure a lot of people know about it, is the GAD book, which is a great book. It's sort of 4 or 8 bar loops, very nicely laid out with some challenging maneuverings. And again, those would be assisting to facilitate a greater cause of good inside the hand exploits. Now, at the other side of the table, you have the movement, because if you don't have the choreography to set all that up, you might run yourself into a place where it just doesn't feel as fluid. And that's what we're after, the flow. So with going back to the 3-stroke Ruff sequences that I would use, I use the 16th note so you can wind into one side. So once I would produce this nice push, tap, pull, and drop into that, cascading right into that down note, the dominant note, I would play it again 16th note. So you could play, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2. With that specific rudiment, I would not really get into any molar release. The molar locomotive action has a specific participation in many things. With this, because you want to drop into that, I wouldn't do that, because it would kind of corrupt my drop into the 3-stroke Ruff. So where I would get into a little bit more of what we have here from the forearm. So as I always speak to my students, you have 3 delivery systems. You have from your shoulder, that could be your main molar strike. You have from the wrist, get a nice open bounce too, and let that stick open the door. Or you can do it from the forearm and just push down. Each one can produce the same effect of opening your hand. We're not going to widen that opening so much when you're playing a 3-stroke Ruff, because it would be counterproductive and it would throw you out of time. You'd be desperately trying to close your hand to get the note back in. So for the 3-stroke Ruff, here's a sequence. I'll do 3 parts. I'll have 16th notes with just 2, 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and 2 E and a 3 E and 4 E and a. The second one I'll do is I'll play the outline of what you would do in a double paradiddle setting. And in 4/4, then you'd have a single paradiddle to transition. So that accent structure with double paradiddle would be 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. Let's now just take the accent structure and apply that with 3-stroke Ruffs, and you would have 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1. And the same thing with the outline of a triple paradiddle accent structure: 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. Through the 3-stroke Ruffs into that accent structure, all alternating strokes, and you'd have. And so the sequence, nice and easy: 3 and 4 and 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then to the third one. And you go back to the second one or go back to the first one. I usually like to do a scalular kind of approach where you go up and down the scale. So if there was a marking of an A, B, and a C, the first one A, second one B, and C, I'd go A, B, C, B, A, B, C, B, and just keep going up and down that sequence and working it out. And of course, I got to work on old lefty. Left hand, of course, we're always in a mode of kind of trying to bring that up to the space of where your right hand is at. And that push-pull, ultimately, truly, really important. Now I could break it down and say, the push-pull is nothing more than, you bring the stick tip down to the pad, it opens up the fingers, and then as the stick weight falls forward, you lift up, and there's a timing element. Very true. Mechanics are what they are. But the setup of the hand and how you build a structure of pressure point and a reflexive movement that responds to that, truly another game. And that is a game changer when you really do it that way. A lot of people have reflexes built into what they do. They pick up drumsticks, basically go, drums, okay, I'm going to play. And they've got their housing, and they've manifested a certain amount of execution factors to supplement what they hear musically. When you want to change, if you feel like you've bumped into a wall, that means you need to step back and rework certain things. Doesn't mean you need to change and overhaul things in a week, because that would be practically impossible. Your head has conduit that has established a relationship with you and sticks. So in order to facilitate a great change, there are certain steps that you can make. I, as a coach, that's what I do. And I do that for, on a daily basis with many students. And I've worked with very high profile guys, as well as just the common guy out there drumming. So I don't make any illusions that I'm not for anybody. I'm for everybody, provided you're looking for technical growth. In that setting, what I would say is that those steps just need to be made, and I provide that pacing of how you can make those changes. And I can, throw down like probably 100 guys off my phone right now, and they'll corroborate the changes. And I'm talking about guys that are in their 50s and 60s who always state, geez, where were you when I was in my 19 or 20-year-old age, when I could really own those changes and not get into a level of habits that have been maybe detrimental. So with the 3-stroke Ruff, really cool, again, just to fine tune the inside of the hand. For the 4-stroke Ruff, again, I would just state that one is a challenging one. And, my breakdown of that would just, again, be centered around the exact same idea. I'd probably sit with the paradiddles, which is really aggravating for many people. For the 5-stroke, which is, okay, so I kind of cheese there. For the 5-stroke, what I use is out of stick control. If you go back to page, I think it's 31, and I generally use 25, 26, and 29. So that's right side lead, left side lead, and then paradiddles in there so you can switch back and forth. Those are great because you get a chance, again, to work on a little bit of a different stance of what's going on. There's a level of using your forearms to induce support to what you're after. What do I mean? If I play a 5-stroke Ruff, I can slide into that. If you ever watched Buddy, how he would get on top of the stick for support, there's a great photo of Freddie Gruber and Buddy Rich back in 1946. Buddy's sitting and he's got the back of a chair, and he's kind of sitting up there. And my imagination always was centered around kind of watching the slope of the stick, being able to facilitate the access of weight value. In the German grip, what's difficult to really discern about the weight value of the stick is that you've got your hand involved. So if you're holding onto the stick, you may not feel the free element of weight of the stick. Truly a game changer, again, when you can feel how the weight of the stick can really be driven and utilized to your advantage. So anyway, back to the Buddy picture. I just imagine him talking about that element. In fact, there was a Lombardi Live where Freddie was talking about a few things. This was the last year, I think, of Freddie's life. And he looked tired and old. I actually made some pilgrimages over to his house regularly at those last 10 years or so. And I have him on video in 2011, which was the year he died, where he was pretty exhausted and not looking too good. But I got him kind of animated about some stuff, and I have him some short clips that I just taped him playing on the practice pad. But what he did talk about was about the element of some of the, major insight of what would be the driving mechanism behind Buddy Rich would be that, just being able to get that stick to pivot over your well, it could be your middle finger, it could be your index finger. It can change inside the hand. You know, I can do it where it's a little bit more produced over my ring finger. Really depends. There's a variable of movement inside the hand that you can process as you go through that rebuilding cycle. So, but that weight factor and feeling that balance of the stick, super important. So if I go to the 5-stroke Ruff, I'll just sit on one side. These exercises are in 3/8. So if you're looking at stick control, go to page 31, look at number 25. It's 1 and 2 and 3. Whoops. So 1 and 2 and 3, 1 and 2 and 3, 1 and 2 and 3, 1. Okay, I'm just trying to talk it through so I can focus on my execution now. When I do that, I want to be able to draw into getting those 4 notes on beat 3 sliding into the downbeat. So it'll be and you see I've got this variable of lift and drop. Now, it's something that doesn't come easy. You want to be able to have access to the lift of your forearm and not jam your shoulder. You can lift your shoulder. I always say you can use that shoulder. If you're doing something on the hi-hat, maybe that support of your shoulder, something that really gives stabilization to your forearm to really pump out 16th notes. But if you walk off the gig like this, that's trouble. You want to be able to add, subtract, and not get caught into anything that is going to be detrimental to your overall general health. And repetitive motion and how you move can be something that you got to monitor. I can just say at my ripe old age of 62, my chops have never felt better, but it's been a constant affair of just sitting on the pad, nothing heavy. Actually, you know, drum set is even better than the pad because my chops become more driven with musical things. You know, pad is good for calisthenics. Absolutely fabulous. And I do that on a daily basis to keep that inside of the hand primed, the glue factor, and feel all those little nuances. And I do the same things I preach to my students. I do those same exercises, and I do them super slow too. Adding a value of space, adding a value of your observation skills to truly be inside what's going on with that movement. If you're not tracking and you're not following your line of thought, then you're really not in it. You aren't what it is. And so that's really the major factor, is to get inside all that so it becomes super reflexive. And then you are less concerned about this, and you can get into here and here to get the flow going for what you're doing musically. So anyway, for that 5-stroke Ruff, again, if you watch how I slide into that downbeat, that's a fabulous way of bringing the fluidity of this. I always say, put a little helium in there. Feel that lift. You don't want to have to, you know, sit down way down here in the pad. It's not really productive. So that concept and the development of that, I would say, is not easy. It's there's a coaching factor that you can really be drawn into, where my observation skills and the proper, let's say, path. And what's the proper path? Each student has something that anatomically or physically, how they process things, will always be a really major consideration to what I do. My observation skills are spot on now. I've been doing this for 40 years. In fact, next year will be really the 40th year of what I document my starting point of teaching. And it'll be my 50th year of playing drums. So kind of interesting. I didn't think about that. But my starting point of teaching was at the Music Stop in 1982, and I started drumming in 1972. So that's a couple of minutes now. But going back to my observation skills, to draw somebody into it, to really help them build and format a repaving of what they've done, is not super complicated. It just requires having really dedicated steps and a process. I'm not one to just throw things out. I mean, I do that here. In essence, these are like snippets of conversations I would have, but there's a few things leading up to getting to here that would be, you know, rather important to put together. So that being said, let's just talk about, you know, the drag, because the drag is somewhat of the Ruff, so to speak, but it is the double. So there is that push to pull. And as I say, as I do that push to pull inside my hand to get that dominant note, the squeeze of that double is basically going to be well produced when I have the dominant note. If I just do a quick squeeze into my hand, there's like a puff of air after it. I don't have anything that I'm posting up towards. If I can have that dominant note in place, then I have a better ability to kind of draw in and bring that drag even a little closer without making it sound like that's going to put that 16th note phrasing out of phase. So here's my 16th notes: 1 E N, 2 E N, 3 E N, 4 E N, 1. Whoops, got to think there. 1 E N, 2 E N, 3 E N, 4 E N, 1, 2, 3, 4 E N, 1 E N, 2 E N, 3 E N, 4 E N. And I did that somewhat of the same outline there. I did the same thing with my rough sequence, where I did sort of a double paradiddle kind of an idea, but no paradiddles in there. In fact, doing a drag with a paradiddle is probably the most challenging of rudiments that you could get into, because you're going to play that I laugh at myself because that's so freaking hard. Anyway, I haven't really done one of those in a while. I center these drags in a more formidable position, whereby when you play a single drag, you can alternate the strokes, which would be very productive to working it out for playing in a real life setting. So what does that mean? If I played eighth notes with the drag at the top of each eighth note, it would be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So I'd play right, left, left, right, right, left, left, right. If you ever met Jimmy Chapin, he'll tell you that was a paradiddle played backwards, because that's the same sticking. Now, it may not sound like a paradiddle, but it does have the mechanics in there, because if you played a paradiddle and you were looking at the movement, it would be right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left. Okay, so I have a down and an up, and then I have my diddle. Well, here's my diddle. Watch my right hand. It's down. My left hand's up. There's my diddle. There's my upstroke. And there's my, my down. Let me play it again. 1 and 2. There, sorry. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 E 4 E and a 1 E and a. So it's the same movement. So I'm not making my case as clear as I normally would. It's early in the morning for me here, so not really. So again, with the drag sequence, I have a very intensive one. And then great literature would be Wilcoxon material. In fact, there is the solo in what is it again? I always forget the title. Modern Rudimental Swing Solos. I always just call it the Swing Solo book. Roughing the Single Drag. What a great exercise in really putting together a format rhythmically that's super challenging to really pull into those drags and build up even a better relationship with the inside of the hand draw. And there's other rudimental passages that I would use from the All-American Drummer from Wilcoxon, stuff that I would take out of the Nard book. Nard book's great because there are less directives. In the Wilcoxon book, every sticking is written out. And I always say, every sticking is written out. It's the greatest advantage to go through the Wilcoxon book, because you have now a template in which you can follow for your movement. But at the same time, the worst thing about the Wilcoxon book is every sticking is written out. So it gives no, input for you to draw into what makes you feel good to go through some kind of a rudimental passage. And since I'm not playing in a drum line, if I was doing Nard stuff, I'm not really concerned about the uniform look. If my drummer friend to the left of me is doing that same thing, I'm thinking more about my articulation and the ease at which I can pull something out. So, Jeffrey, any questions at this point in time?
No, we've got a lot of eyes and we got some lurkers, which is always good. And
come on, guys, ask a question or two. I'm here.
Yeah, always. And I think you just saw I popped up a couple of people, like Chris was in the house, and I saw Jeffrey Boyle.
Chris, yeah.
You were saying Jeffrey, some, and of course Hamilton. So
Hey,
I
man.
just wanted to drop those guys in. And yes, so anybody have questions on not only today's topics, but again, if you
Anything.
want
Yeah,
to
we
put
can reach.
anything, I will hold them out and I will inject them and get those questions over to Bruce. Happy to do it. Of course, anytime.
So, some people I've taught have had a comment about, well, with my drags, can I just buzz them? You can buzz them too, but you are going to have a choice if you can get a clean stroke. Nothing wrong with buzzing. Buzz roll has a different sensibility. Buzz roll, I'd get rid of the ring and pinky finger and draw that over my middle finger. So I am unencumbered by too many fingers. That the balance point now is just directed over my middle finger print. And my middle finger adds like a little flex where it stretches out and then it draws the stick in to add a little bit more of that buzz that you can get. Instead of just pushing it in and killing it. You don't want to just press it into the pad or the snare drum. And if you can get a good buzz roll on a pad, the snare drum is way more forgiving. So anyway, we're not really talking about the buzz. I could if somebody has a question about it, but let me go into how all this stuff can affect what you do for your diddles. Of course, diddles, double paradiddles, triple paradiddles. I don't use the triple paradiddle a whole bunch. It is something that I put in there, but let's just say a diddle as more of a relationship to a double. Those are all induced by a quick push to pull. So all that open and close factor that you're doing in drags and rough settings would be harnessed into the control factor of what you're going to do when you're playing this one, a paradiddle, diddle, diddle. And if I'm playing with my, again, a little bit of speed factor, I'm going to increase the angle towards the stick tip so the stick doesn't get away from me. So that's something that I'm key on, that factor of if you are dropping to a certain threshold, where maybe you're playing slower right about here, you could really let the stick open up. That's one way. But if I was doing it where I want to get a little bit of the fast out of it, I'm going to increase a little bit of the angle so the stick doesn't bounce away from me. And that idea of that bounce factor is, again, something you want to control. You don't want to let that stick, well, you can, but you're going to work harder. You can let the stick go beyond 90 degrees. You're now working against the weight factor of the stick. If the stick is staying in front of the 90-degree plane, then the weight factor falling back is at your disposal. If you go beyond 90, you're going to have to thrust it back over that point to bring it back to the pad. You want to fight? That's on you. I'm not about fighting. I want to take the path of least resistance. I've seen people talk about wrist bounce and go way back here or draw the stick into their hand like that. Not really that important, or let's say not efficient. Because if I'm out of phase with my wrist trying to pull that stick in there, I'm not really truly getting a wrist bounce. And the turn factor, again, you can make the difference by practicing that and just see how it feels. And then you'll do the Bruce Becker statement of what's the difference if you don't know the difference. If you're playing from here versus here, you feel that the weight of the stick is now to your advantage. And there's a stabilization of the fingers with the body of the stick. Again, it would be awesome to have a drum sheet for this class. I'll tell you what, I'll let you transcribe it, man. I'm just free falling. I mean, I'm doing what I do.
My point was, there might be a thing where we could come up with one line of something that kind of encapsulates these along the way. And maybe in the future we can consider that. But to do the whole scoring of this would be a lot of fun. But he had a follow-up question about, I'm not exactly sure, but it says, when I'll switch to the double paradiddle using the flams, you use the same, R double L scheme?
Well, when I'll switch to the double paradiddle using flams, well, you're using two different terminologies. Double paradiddle would be, double paradiddle, right. So if I'm playing a double paradiddle, you can play flams in front of those. Now, my go-to, because I did this years ago, is to play flam paradiddle diddles alternating, which is much more accessible to me. Yeah, I could play double flam or double paradiddles with flams in front of them. So I got to think a little bit about that because that's not normally in my head in terms of practicing. But if it's in a rudimental passage, no problem. My whole game would be, again, play it slow so that I can maneuver through and feel what I got to do to generate a flow with the movement, with the stickings, and make it musical. And that was allegedly the idea what Philly Joe Jones would do with the Wilcoxon book. Play them very slowly and maneuver through them and kind of probably orchestrate. And if you listen to Philly's playing, you can hear that kind of sensibility. You certainly hear the flow, that's for sure. The Gadamant's book is great because in Gad's book, he has things that you really have to be sensible about with your movement to produce like a really well-structured flow. Something in the drag I'll draw back to. My second letter on my drag sequence, which, if I'm not mistaken, I think on my YouTube channel, I did a drag sequence. I did 3 of them, and there might be a PDF on that, accessible on that video. But the second one being triplets, the drag moved to the of a triplet. So in other words, let me play from 8th notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, lead 2, lead 3, lead 4, lead 1, lead 2. So now, while I'm squeezing that note to get my double before my dominant note, that's coming up to set up the downstroke with the same stick. That's a little tricky. That would, again, if you look at the sticking of that, let's just say for practical conversation, that if I'm playing 1 and lead 2 and lead 3 and lead 4, that again with the double in the middle there, I could play 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1. So repositioning that would still give me the sensibility of a paradiddle, but it would be the inverted paradiddle. When you play an inverted paradiddle, the movement behind that, the choreography, would be that the diddle in the middle is an upstroke. 1E and 2E and 3E and 4E and a 1. Again, in its pure form. If you're looking to accent other parts of it, then that goes off the table. So in the drag, if I was playing that, it would be 1 and lead 2 and lead 3 and lead 4 and lead 1. So that squeeze on the inside of the hand should be, let's say, independent of the upstroke, in that the mechanics can't be corrupted by the upstroke. They still need to be working clean and not allow the upstroke to make them feel less than. And that's part of the exercise, is to really induce that positioning and also the movement. Okay. So in most cases, though, a lot of times your drags are going to be more in a tap stroke position, but not all the time. So you got to look into that as well and be able to facilitate that and get a flow and not let that be an obstruction to you to do other things in that realm of drags. So now let's go to the diddles again. And so diddles are interesting because, again, they're using the push pull or open close, or however you want to say it. I say bounce close. You can use open close. You can do push pull, whatever you use directive wise. It's just about having a hyper awareness of the inner workings of the pivoting of the stick. If you're working against the balance of the stick, that's going to be a labored affair. And if your fingers aren't hypersensitive, as in the case of how I describe them as being like bungee cords, giving with that pivoting stick and then drawing in without over snapping it, because you can drive that stick into the hand, that's overplaying it. I don't want to overplay it. I want to let it just drop and come back into my hand. So those sensibilities are all drawn in from the same ideas. The delivery system might be just slightly different, and certainly the presentation will make it look and perhaps feel different at first. But when you get down to brass tacks, it's all the same. It works like a certain way, and that's just how it works. It's as Freddie Gruber used to say what Buddy Rich would say. He'd say, "It's what it is, man." And now doing this for a long time, I can say, yeah, it's what it is. There's not a lot of trickery to it. There's loosen up your arms. If you got too much tension and you're holding on the stick tight, and you've got the stick in an interesting position where it's not going to extract the usage of your fingers. In other words, if you get into that middle joint and you're opening your fingers, there's going to be a disconnect from your fingers. If I'm sitting in the last joint, my fingers are going to be a little bit easier to just let them flex out. Rather valuable. Not easy to just get that to this position where you go, you've seen many videos where the guy says, and just hold the stick like that. Of course. But how do you get somebody there who's holding the stick like this and doing it for 25 years? That's not going to fold in very easily. They're going to do that, and then their fingers are going to reflexively go back to what they know. So by building up a relationship of the pressure points and utilizing my very detailed steps, you can make absolute significant changes in how that works. It may not be turning into the picture in a short time, but conceptually, all that stuff will permeate what you do, and you'll feel a difference of how the stick works on the inside of your hand. So I'll stop here again just to make a point, a stopping point. Any questions or any comments, Jeffrey?
No, not really. I think you answered the other question, but I know that Hamilton followed up with something you were talking about earlier, and he was asking about the swing feel, but that was something I think you were touching on a little bit earlier. So I'm not as sure what context that was asked in. So I'm not. He can follow up, but I'm not sure.
I mean, the swing feel is just, again, having the ability to alter the movement of your notes to, you can overswing it. You can bring it in the middle. Let's just say if you bring it in the middle, you're basically talking about like that swing factor of what jazz has to offer at the triplets topic. Well, if I'm playing triplets, it's always going to be swinging there because you're playing triplets, right? If that's your question. And are you always playing, put that back up, playing diddles with a push-pull? Well, it's not, it's not like this idea. I mean, I've seen people do push-pull and they've got a different presentation. There's a uniform approach to how my hand works, whether I'm playing what Freddie Gruber called the system, which would be the push-pull, and I want to honor the shell and the shape of my hand and not doing anything that's different. I've seen guys try to use their thumb or demonstrate with their thumb and all that stuff. It's very agitating to me. That can be very detrimental, I think, to your tendons inside your thumb. And a case by case, I'd have to see individual guys. And if they're not calling me and saying they don't have a problem, then I don't really, I'm not going to make any bones about it. I can say, I know how it works. I know how I can facilitate changes. But yes, that push-pull to every double stroke is always activated. Okay. Now there, when I'm playing a paradiddle diddle, it's a duality because there's the molar factor. That's just a drop and a close or a push and a pull or a bounce and a catch. Again, choose your word choice for the directive. But this cycle of movement, that's molar. It's just not 3 evenly spaced notes like this. And in the molar element, you can bring it a little bit more inside the hand. So I'm still getting a good bounce. I'm just not letting it pull as far away from the hand. Here it is pulling further away from the palm. But I don't want to go beyond a certain place because I need to sort of flex back in. And if I go, that's going to force me into having more labored stroke to get that out. I want it to just be easily driven. So that means you got to, be consciously aware of the tension factor of here, into your bicep, into your forearm, into your wrist, and how the fingers sit and stabilize the stick. And I say stabilize in the fact that the stick is seated in the hand. The fingers aren't recklessly flying off the stick like dust. Matthias, is there a special reason that you sit very high, but your drums are rather low? That gives your forearms a sloping tendency. Okay, great question. And I've been thinking about it and I've brought it up for many years to my students. My seated position is based on the element of accessing my weight for my feet. 1. 2, I really like sitting on top of the drum. So if I'm sitting up here, I can get to the tips nice and easy, and I can still drop a little bit below and get my pop or my rim shot or just a smack to the cymbal or the drum a certain way. It allows me to use that flex of sitting here and dropping down. So again, when did that start to happen? Somewhere in like the mid 2000s, you know, like so 2005, 6, 7, 8, where I was having some issues in here, and it wasn't from rock and roll. It was playing lighter. I was really struggling to get a good touch with my foot. And you know, first foremost, I took that and went to the bank and started working the crap out of my foot and revisiting things that I had done earlier, but with a little bit of a different musical twist and identity to them. And so I'll just make a quick segue. Whatever you do with the hands, I do an immense amount of work with the feet to bring them up to a nimbleness and touch and control factor too. That gives you choices. You're not locked into one position doing things with your foot as you can with your hands. Have more expansive range and motion and not get stuck into one thing. But my reason for that is I really like sitting on top of the drums. When I lower my seat, that doesn't work. If I raise my drums, I just feel like I don't have the ability of just letting go. And this is a huge component of everything that I would do, that breath of letting go. Now, of course, you got to facilitate the documentation of that movement so that it's not just willy-nilly and crashing and burning, that there's a rhythmic component that is instilled there. Super important, because that's going to bring you a multitude of flow and dance and a space of owning that rhythmic identity of what you're doing with that movement. But back to the, you know, seating posture, it's just gotten really comfortable for me to sit up here. So I have access to this position for my hi-hat, this position for my cymbal. I can sit here on the tips if I'm doing something a little bit more finesse oriented. And if I want to just drop into my backbeat, you know, I drop a little bit lower. And this is about the same height, you know, so a little roughly. I'm always putting this on there, so this goes up and down a little bit, where the snare drum, because I'm not teaching live, really just sits a little bit more static. When I had students in here, everything was up and down and all over the place. Can you break down how you approach the 4-stroke rough paradiddle? Thank you. Yes, Eric. So the 4-stroke rough paradiddle. Again, I would start with the push to pull, or the, how would I say it? I would say push, push, pull, pull. That's a very, very basic kind of, what I would say is not a real fair description. It is what's going on, but again, there's a certain kind of draw into the hand that you want to have. And the touch factor of your fingerprints and the delicacy of how the fingers can follow that stick is of major consideration before I get there. That being said, you know, I'll do it slow. I would play, there's beat 1, 1 E and 2 E and really hard, because you're coming in from a diddle, and then you got to suck those guys in and get the push to pull and really get it to rip. That's something that I worked a whole bunch on, because Freddie Gruber really was like elbowing me and beating me up with that to get, as he sort of described, you know, to feel this rip like it's perforated paper, like, you know, a tear. Hey, Bruce, Troy from NJ American One Productions Rehearsal Studios. Thank you for sharing this terrific knowledge. Thank you very much, Troy. I appreciate you joining the stream here and checking things out. Thank you. So, you know, the 4-stroke rough paradiddle is something that's, you know, like, I'll tell you, I don't know if I may have said this before, but I think I did on one video or another. Jimmy Chapin told me that was the stupidest rudiment ever invented. And because I was like, hey, Jimmy, what about this one? And he just totally deflated me. That's the stupidest rudiment ever invented. And I was like, okay. But I didn't see it that way. I thought that it really put into spirit some of the push-pull factor and the choreography of the paradiddle, you know, down, up, double, down, up, double. So and not corrupting this. So in terms of putting it together, it's, you know, I'd go through probably working out the 4-stroke ruff. Whoops, that was a sheety one. Let's try that again. So I would do a bunch of right-hand ones and then a bunch of lefties. Now for me, maybe many people who are right-handed, left one is easier because you're leading with your right hand. So I spent a lot more time working on the right-hand lead because my 3 or 4 strokes start with the left hand. And that's the same for a lot of things. If I'm doing flams, my left flams are much easier because this guy gets a chance to sneak in front and kind of sit in a nice position. If I do flam paradiddles, I'll just do non-alternating left flam paradiddles. And that's something I do in my phrasing. You know, a lot of things that I do are built on phrasing and musicianship and things that I've come across on my drum set playing. I'll tell you, you know, something that I've been really key on for many, many years, and I'm probably due to do something on this in terms of the higher level concepts of what Gary Chafee has put forward in his Sticking Patterns book. If you go to the 3rd section, he doesn't talk about rudiments. He has a masterful way of putting forward a concept of expanding your range of stickings and really putting forward challenging. Now, I take more of the highlights. There's things that I extract from the book, but I've sort of taken more of the conceptual thing, which is, I think, what everybody should be doing when you go through a book. Get the concept and then start to move it around. Now, that's not easy sometimes because you may not have the ideas. You may get complacent and only sit with one idea. You need to be pushed along sometimes. But the same thing would hold true for whether it's the 4-way coordination book by Dahlgren and Fine. Well, Ted Reed syncopation, there's no real concept. There's a million of them. I have several million. And then there's Chafee's books, the Gary Chester, the New Breed books. Those are all great to like expand and kind of build up your thing. Move your body around, stretch it out a bit and see what you can come up with. You know, it's easy to kind of gravitate towards watching licks on YouTube. And you might see a guy do a lick that's fascinating, but take it and shape it to your, you know, specs, so to speak. If you're trying to like put on somebody's shoes and they wear a size 14.5, but you only have a 9.5, it's not going to work, you know? So while that's fun and while the internet has been a great source of people throwing stuff up to kind of us to be voyeurs and look in there and go, ooh, look at that, look at that. At the end of the day, it's about building up musicianship too, not just drum technique or drum, let's say, drum pyrotechnics. You know, let's make drumming more musical and not drumming for sport. And again, it's interesting, but a lot of things you might see will not be practical on a gig. And the guys who are working the gigs, like the real, you know, like the hard hitting guys, I'll just throw out 2 guys that come to mind right away, Mark Shulman or Rich Redmond. They're just playing the music, man. They know how to deliver a feel and a sensibility. They got some chop in there, but they're not busting out a bunch of chops. The band leaders will look back at them and go like, what the hell's going on back there, man? Can you just play time for me? So those, I think that's another conversation, but that's something I would really be, you know, in on with some ideas. But practice makes the drummer, right? Absolutely. practice makes the drummer. If you don't, I always say nothing comes from doing nothing. You have to spend some time deliberating. Now, you can get lost and just play tunes. There's nothing wrong with that. That develops musicianship. But if you're looking to expand your range of how you move and the insights that you might have for stickings to either create patterns or movement around the kit, a total must, man. If you're not engaged in that, you're not going to expand, right? Why did Chapin feel that way with the 4-stroke rough paradiddle? Honestly, my thoughts are that when Jimmy played at the molar, he let his index finger sit a little bit more open. And so that maybe the push to pull was not as strongly a consideration for him. I'm sure he could do it. But everything he did was really built around, the locomotive action of molar. So, it's hard to say. Jimmy's not here, so I can't speak for him. Although I'd love to have a conversation with him. He'd always tell me, and I hung with him for several years, especially when I lived in Europe. But when I'd come here, or when I moved back here at a NAMM show or whatever, and I'd see him, he'd always say to me, your hands look just like mine. And I'd go, yeah, I see that. I mean, he was very loose fellow, very agile. And I'll tell you one story, man, the greatest story of Jimmy Chapin. I never saw him play like this before. But we were leaving the Frankfurt Music Fair. And they'd have like a very strict, like everybody's got to leave. And then you're with Freddie Gruber. Well, Freddie didn't work on anybody's time. So he'd always be sort of belligerent and walk his pace. So we're leaving. I'm walking with Jimmy and Freddie. And most of the show, I think like 98% of that room is cleared. And we're walking real slow. And those guys were chit-chatting. They were kind of in a better space with one another. And Jimmy just stopped for a second. And I guess he had like a little bag and he put it down. And he didn't even say anything. He just sat down on a drum set. And he did this one thing where he played super just loose and polyrhythmic. And I was like, oh my God, that was ridiculous. And then he just picked up his bag and kept walking. It was so bizarre, man. It was like he just had something he had in his head or something and had to sit down and do it. It was fantastic. I wish, again, that's around 1994 or 5. So, we didn't have these things where we could just, hey, let me catch that on video. It'll go viral. But it was really amazing. It was great to be at that space and time. It sits very clear in my head of what he was doing. Well, I don't know if I'm an encyclopedia, but I've lived enough life where I think I have enough perspective of certain things. And thank you. I appreciate your accolades. So back to, just kind of flowing. I just want to check the time here because I'm a little bit up to a time crunch. We're up at the hour, but we can hang a little longer. With, the element of, how doubles work and stuff like that. Really, I'm a true believer in getting your wrists to help facilitate the double stroke. And yes, there are other choreographing moves that would be essential for 5-stroke, 7-stroke, 9-stroke. I always want to put a punctuation mark at the end of the roll. What is it? Is it a period or is it an exclamation point? So what do I mean? Exclamation point, maybe an accent, but a period, I still have an up to down to end my roll. And that's just sort of built in. That works with a lot of the rudimental exploits that I've gone through and really defining an essence to how a roll can work. So with the diddles on the inside of the hand, they are generated by what I would just speak of an open close, a push pull, bounce catch, however you want to label it or name it. It depends on the direction because you could do doubles like this with a downstroke and an upstroke. My fingers are opening and closing. I could do it from a wristed position. I'm doing a bounce and a catch, and I'm also drawing my wrist back. At first, I would want to build up a relationship with the wrist motion so that I have the range and motion recognized. Am I going to use it that wide open? I don't think so. But you still want to have your relationship with how things move. If you kind of squelch them and only use one element of momentum, you're missing out on a greater expansion of orbit that you can tap into. So All those things are major considerations. And just going back to, the wristed double. Again, I'm not going to do that. That's pulling away from the hand. Look at my hand. My fingers are nice and sealed around the stick, and I'm going to let the stick free fall as I fall down. Impact, even open my fingers a little wider and then come back into the hand, whether I'm ending up here or I'm ending here or I'm ending up here, wherever it is. That's always going to be a major component. But that delivery system of how you're moving, super important, man. Like all the hinges need to have a little shot of WD-40 so that everything ain't squeaking. I love that name, Basement Artie. Can you demonstrate playing 16th notes with your left hand against the dotted ride cymbal pattern I'm working on? I don't have the book. Sadly, that's a book I should have on my shelf, and I've said that for years. I just haven't done that. But if I play in here, it's going to be wonky. I can play on the pad. Now, I'll do this. I don't really, with the dotted 8th, 16th, and I think Jimmy would concur, that should also be interpreted as triplets. The idea behind that may have been a notation issue in that it's easier probably to have gone to a printing press and write that out and not have to get an 8th note triplet rest on the middle and all that stuff and have the triplet on the top, all that stuff. I always think that was a printing press consideration to make it easier. Just like guys would say, hey, 8th notes, they're just jazz 8th notes. They equal the first and third partial of 8th note triplets when they're written in just regular formatted 8th notes. But if I was doing this, so those are Eanas. I can get that staying in a triplet. And it's better when I'm sitting on the drum set. I can kind of hear my voicings a little better. I don't think, to go, and my chops aren't warmed up to pull my 16th notes out with the molar effect. And that's not really what I would do in a jazz setting anyway. I would use 16th notes for sure. I would use the main two layouts would be either E and or one E and, and when I say one E and, that's just generic for one E and, two E and, three and, four and. So if I was going ding, 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 and then put the bass drum in there or the hi-hat, absolutely. But not quite sure. Now, if you want to do that, you could go slow. Da 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 da. I would break that down like that. Absolutely. I'm not quite sure if it's something I would mess around with. I mean, everything's on the table. But in terms of, there's so many other building blocks that would be more appropriate for building up musicianship for the jazz ride sensibilities. And again, your best format for learning jazz or embellishing on your relationship with the jazz idiom, listen to a bunch of guys. Listen to Roy Haynes and Philly Joe Jones and Max Roach and Tony Williams and Alvin Jones and Jack DeJohnette and whoever, Art Taylor, Art Blakey, Lewis Hayes, I don't know, trying to think of some more off the beat, Shelly Mann, Jake Hanna, Jeff Hamilton, Bill Stewart. That's a large spectrum of guys. They all have their unique personalities inside what they do. And so you want to extract that. Yes, you want to work on your technical and independence values so that you're more flexible to lift from them. And then when you lift, make it your own, steal it, take it in, process it, make it like I could play a bunch of stuff and go like, I got this from Jack DeJohnette, I got this from Alvin Jones, oh, I got this from Peter Erskine, or Steve Gadd or whoever, or Philly Joe Jones. And, at the end of the day, I can't sound like those guys. So when I play it back, it doesn't sound like them. I didn't want it to. I wanted it to sound like me and kind of build up my relationship with those phrasings so that when I'm speaking sentence structure inside what I'm playing, that there's a realness to it. I don't want to be a copy kind of a guy. I mean, that doesn't mean that the guy who's doing that is going to sound like he's copying. Maybe, I don't know. It depends. But for me, there was a stress point of do your own thing, be your own guy. I know that Pat Metheny spoke about that, and he just did recently an interview with Rick Beato, and where he grew up when he was playing, if he went in and started playing like Wes Montgomery, they go like, Wes did it, man. Do your own thing. What are you doing? And in my youth, that was stressed from a few different entities, certainly from Freddie Gruber. He had, do your own thing, do your own thing, be your guy. He'd help you facilitate that. If you had good clarity as to what you were looking to build, he'd really kind of hone in on that. For me, because I started with him young and he was more comprehensive in his teaching, that first year, it gave me even more structure to define better what I was looking for. When I went in there, I just went, I want chops. Well, I was 18 or 19. So of course you want chops. But musically, I was kind of figuring out what I thought my voice would be best used for. So anyway, I'm really thankful for your lessons and guidance. I try to work on your advice and videos. Thank you, Farhan. Thank you. We try to do these streams semi-regularly. Jeff and I have how many have we done, Jeffrey? About 8?
Yeah, I think we're going about 8. I know we've not talked about trying to maybe come up with a consistent rotation. So
we'll work on that maybe for 2022. The other thing is, please keep an eye on my masterclass. Now, I haven't done one since I think we did one in August. So we're probably toying with, putting one out after the first of the year. And, again, it'll be topically in this vein. There's lots of things that I do. I try to be somewhat a little bit more pointed and stay in an avenue with some thought process that I have for building. At the end of the day, it all bleeds in together, at some point. But I try to stay a little bit more precise into a lane and give some of the formidable calisthenics that I would use to help develop a specific, whether it's foot, whether it's paradiddles, or whether it's, whatever. Right? It really depends. I can't remember all the titles. I know we had the paradiddle dance. I think we had a jazz concepts one.
With Moeller.
The Moeller technique. That's right. We got flagged on Facebook because I said
Moeller.
What did I say?
It was the
Moeller report. And
the Moeller report that got us slammed.
Slamming me because they maybe thought it was political, the Mueller report, but I was using being a little, funny and trying to be clever. And of course, we got locked out for 5 days?
Yeah, it was a little bit frustrating to get that rectified too.
Oh yeah, that triplet challenge is great. That's a really good one. Nice and slow and open. You can play in French grip and German. And the French grip, just to go to a little segue, that's a really, truly a great way to feel the weight of the stick and open up some of the channels of flow inside your formatting of your delivery. When you're playing from here, you see my forearm activated by the bouncing stick. As I get faster, yes, it's going to be relegated to fingers. But I want to have all those gears. In fact, even when I play slower, my forearm would be drawn in, because I don't want to go beyond 90 degrees. I don't want to do this. That's forcing it. I just saw, a video regarding wrist bounces where the stick was going way back here. And I went, that's extra work. You can sit nicely in front of here. Everything is a gear, right? If I'm in fingers, great. And if I want to roll back into more of a German position for my wrist bounce, well, I could sit here too and just let the forearms be activated for a bounce and go into my fingers. That would be more of an American position. I could come center in my French grip and roll out. I want to have that expanded accessibility to all those positions. Sorry, I'm kind of fumbling here, but I'm in a stream of speaking. Sorry about the loose sticks. Anyway, that's the way it swings over here in my world of trying to really facilitate, build some concept, understand the dynamic of the fluidity of time and space, and putting that into a comprehensive approach that is let's say, digestible. Don't want to be talking in ways that are like not speaking the spirit of music. So, you know, fortunately for me, I did a lot of playing. I've done, you know, at least somewhere in the couple to 3,000 gigs, maybe a few more. I don't know. I'd have to count. that'd be a hard process. Get my calculator. How many? Let's see. How many gigs did I play in 1977? You know. So, any new music coming up with your brother David? No. You know, David and I haven't really worked together for about 4 years or so. The last thing we did was a thing called Kiwi Dreams. It was going to be a bigger part of a record project. We went down to New Zealand to record a live gig in Auckland. And when I was in the moment playing, the first 5 tunes, I was like, this is great, man. We're all oiled. Everybody's playing well together. And the recording just sounded like shit, man. You know, the recording quality. So,
by the way, I wanted to call attention. I think you went over 2 million on, I interrupted you a little bit there. I didn't mean to. That was no for later, but you went over 2 million on your video for Drumeo for the Chop Suey drum cover. I thought I wanted to let people know and congratulate you on that. That
was awesome. And then there's another video I did that was more of educational. They deemed it like the most important drum technique or something like that. And that went over 1 million a couple weeks back as well. So kind of cool, you know. I mean,
congrats. Yeah,
it's not my channel, but you know, it's still nice that, you know, it's nice to be part of it, and that people have, you know, because not every video gets that kind of views. And so very gracious. And I'm always you know, gracious to Jared and Dave and the Drumeo team for all their exposure to my teaching. The drum technique course that I did for Jared is a great class. If you want to start there and then come to me afterwards. All the lives stay up after the streaming. Yeah, we haven't taken them down, Hamilton. They're all up there. They are, right? We haven't taken them down. They're all up on my YouTube channel. If you just go look at my YouTube channel. And if you're not a subscriber, which I'm sure everybody is. Hey, Mark from San Antonio. I actually have a newer student from San Antonio. Press the thumbs up button, my friends. Oh, thank you. Press the thumbs up button. Yeah. So, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. So, you know, with Drumeo, man, those guys really, you know, kind of kicked my visibility up quite a bit. I did some stuff before with Drum Channel for a little bit, but Drumeo seemed to give a little more traction to what I did. I guess it's just a matter of, I don't know, that untangible or intangible quality of what Drumeo was doing and really working hard to get their business stuff out there and flying in the ethers of the net. Love the hands course on Drumeo. Thank you, man. Yeah, that was a good course. Everything was choreographed. I do more inside the hand details in a live setting because there's more steps. If I would have done a Drumeo technique course with all that, it would have been not 26 parts. It would have been 126 parts and maybe too daunting for many people. But at the end of the day, it's all about extending your shelf life and building up a fluidity to what you do so that you're not pounding and extending your drum life. And like I said, I've got, oh man, the guys in the age category of 50 to 60, at least maybe close to 100 guys or 80 guys that I could, right now, I could text them all and go like, hey, throw up on YouTube and say what you've gotten from that. And they'll all, you know, from, I don't need to name names, but all those guys, you know, it's just regularly kind of a cool thing. How do you combine molar with push-pull? Oh, I keep going back. Yeah, well, that's a good one, actually, because that push-pull, that's an effect that, again, is going to be a response to whatever the delivery system is. So if you were playing, and I love the Bob Ross photo, man, thanks. I never heard of Bob Ross until I lived, not lived, because it was after the fact. When I traveled back to Europe quite a bit, the bass player that my brother and I worked with for many years, Bulla Diekman, great guy. He's my bro. We'd sit in his house, not apartment. And he'd give me the remote and I'd just be kind of flipping through and seeing what was on. We grab a couple of beers and I'm flipping through and there's Bob Ross. I go, who's this guy? I'd never heard of him before until about 2000, maybe 2005 or 6. And he goes, oh, I love Bob Ross. Sometimes I sit down, I just put him on and I drink my beer, and he's very calming. And I guess so. He is, posthumously created a whole entity where there's even a Bob Ross channel, I guess. Phenomenal. But yeah, so that inside the hand for a jazz ride cymbal pattern, I would use that. Or just playing like, 1 EN, 2 EN, 3 EN, 4 EN, 1 EN, 2 EN. Or ding, 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 ding. So there's that. Draw the stick back into the hand. That's an extended push to pull, but it is a push to pull nonetheless. So tech question, in the process of purchasing a laptop to take lessons with you, any recommendations on what to get? No, not really. I mean, you want to have a good camera. So, if you're like my one student had a laptop and the camera was just crappy. So he went out and got a Logitech, what is it, the C920, whatever. I have a few of those. This camera that I'm using now is on my brand new iMac, so it's a great camera. So I don't need that Logitech anymore. But that's all. And then have a good practice pad. The distance, of course, is crucial. So you said, I'm like 4 feet or so from my camera. I want to be able to see somebody's hands and arms and stuff like that. But I'll move you around and tell you what I need to see on my end.
Right? I actually jot myself up here. But yeah, any HD camera would do on it. But you're right, the onboard stuff for the laptops just don't work because they don't catch the frame rates. That's the other problem. So for what you're trying to see, yourself, it's like even if it works, the other problem is the frame rates are so slow. Sometimes you have a hard time probably seeing. But any HD camera will work, but that 920 will work just fine.
One other thing I would say about that, though, Mark, to answer another part of the question would be, if you can, have an Ethernet cable to your modem if it's convenient. Now, I know some people have their modem in like a completely different area of their house, so it's not a practical consideration. But when you're hardwired, you're going to have less disruptions, depending upon, of course, what kind of internet signal you have. If you have, like I'm with Spectrum, but I have I think it's 200 megabits, but I'm hardwired. So I don't really usually have a problem on my end. When I was going Wi-Fi some years ago, I didn't understand that just because I saw all the bars enacted, upon or intact, that there was other disruptions that can make your Wi-Fi faulty. So about 7 years ago, I hardwired, and it was like, oh, okay. And as technology has gone on with Zoom and Skype, and I use FaceTime once in a while, mostly Zoom now. It's not the greatest, but it's pretty damn good, and it's way more stable than what it used to be. So you want to have a good picture on your end so you can see me, so you can see what's going on. And that's really how you do that. How to improve We Can for better ghost notes, any exercises? Wow, that's a great question. You got to work on just playing ghost notes at first to get a good tap and feel that weight of the stick, but get a good touch to the tip of the stick. And, when you're working, for example, on something that might be a little bit more, let's say, I'll do it inside the hand molar where I'm getting a big accent and touching. You want to get a good intention of those lighter notes. I have an exercise that I use. It's just called tap strokes, where I use stuff out of stick control. It's not necessarily all about the sticking, more about the delivery. And I call that a direct drive approach, where there's a firm density to it, but not overdriving it. And then, the quality of lightening up on your snare drum, well, that takes time. You want to work on certain things that would enhance that. I just do some simple patterns for my students that are basically tied into an element of what I do with the bass drum to bridge the top and the bottom nicely together. And I put ghost notes in there, practical ones, that will address the touch factor. Because you don't want everything like screaming out in front of you. You want to be able to bring a contrast to what's going on. That's what adds a better frame of what you're doing pattern-wise. But I have no quick fix. I do say working on tap strokes and getting a good sense of control and touch with that left hand would be step one. Everything I do is always built in steps. There's a bigger format. So there's nothing that I would take on that doesn't have a range of thought behind it before we embark upon the path. And Jeffrey will corroborate that because he was a student of mine, or sort of been. Still, we consult and hang. But for about 3 years, Jeff?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that never ends. That's
no, that's the thing. I was under the impression when I was studying with Freddie that, I'll get my chops together in like a year and a half and then I'm on my way. Well, the chop thing, because we play with, our hands and our feet, it's a very physical instrument. There's a necessity to stay in that mold of practice and keep the things loose. Now, you can rest on your laurels, but you might start to drop down a little bit. Now that I'm not playing any gigs or rarely playing gigs, I have the intention, but as I am teaching quite often and I have 2 small kids, my priorities have shifted. And I've always been teaching and playing on sort of parallel paths until the teaching just kind of went whoop, and it became apparent that, now it's time to step back. I didn't a lot of playing. I mean, I was very fortunate. I've, done some sessions with Ron Carter, Mike Stern. My brother and I played all over the place. I worked with a Hammond B3, great jazz organist, Barbara Dennerlein, did a lot of high-level jazz festivals with, all my heroes on stage. And played with guys like Frank Mbali and Russ Ferrante. And in town, never like a big sideman gig, but I worked with all the guys that have those gigs, so the guitar player from Foreigner, the guitar player and bass player from Beth Hart, the bass player from Don Henley's band, and on and on. I was very fortunate to hang with those guys, all high level players. And so always felt very blessed and fortunate to be able to sit in that room. My path was not necessarily the sideman thing, because I had done a leadership role with my brother for many years. I mean, we signed to MCA back in 1986, and it was all about that thing. And my voice was a dominant voice in what material was recorded, arrangements, production, who played. I actually budgeted some of those studio affairs, where I sat back and had the budget from the record company and drew everything up. Let's hire this guy. We've got enough money to go to this studio to do the mixing and all that stuff. It was fantastic. Really fortunate that was able to sit in that world for a number of years, My sound for my drums changed as soon as I understand how to. Yes, absolutely. That's a big effect, man. Tone. All that stuff that I'm talking about is always fixated with an element of tone. If you're holding your stick tight, you're not going to let that stick resonate very well. If you open up the channel, you can get a much nicer resonant quality to the stick. So knowing that, identifying that is one big step. And then things will change. You'll sound different. You won't hit as hard. Hitting hard, you can hit the drum super hard and loud. It's not going to produce a better tone. It might have a louder sound, but it's not going to be a better tone. Might be all that high end because you hit it so hard, it kind of shocked everything. Everything's hit so fast and hard that you're not going to get that nice body that you want to get out of a drum. So that's, something that I've become way more aware, especially in the last 10 or 12 years, where I really started to see that when I would play with some cover bands and be rocking out, and I go, shit, man, I'm losing my touch a little bit, and then I had to kind of draw in to kind of keep my dynamics where it was, because I knew that even if I hit harder, it's not going to sound better. I'll get as loud of a sound if I just stay in my place of where I want to be, but not easy when you don't have good sound reinforcement. It's not like my drums were all mic'd up and I had in-ears and all that stuff. It's just a club gig. So you got to go roll with the changes. Anyway, Jeffrey, thank you.
Yes, sir.
We'll hang it up here. As always, I appreciate everybody who hung with us, and stay tuned. Subscribe. If you do subscribe, you will at least get some kind of a notification, I guess, right? Does that happen when?
Yes, I dropped into Here we go. I did drop into chat. So for the particular stream, as well as past streams and all your other videos, which you have quite a few up there as well, with some major tips and tricks and skill sets. So that's all up there. So head over there and subscribe to Bruce's channel, and future notifications you'll get, and hopefully we'll see you.
Yeah. Point. And everybody who's from the States, have a great Thanksgiving holiday. And those who aren't, have a great Thanksgiving anyway. Let's give thanks to whatever. The thanks that we are capable of playing drums and constantly working on our craft and getting better. Because, man, these things, as Freddie Gruber would say, these things kept me out of jail.
That and a good attorney.
Yeah,
just kidding. No, the chat was great today. I appreciate all the great questions, and Bruce, it was a wonderful stream. I appreciate that.
Thanks, man. Thank you. Yeah. All right, guys. All Peace. Right. See you next time.
See you guys next time.